Arizona Territory, spring of 1879. The sun was already blistering the earth by midday when Zadie Morrow stepped barefoot across the dry yard, the heavy door of the settler's cabin slamming shut behind her like a final verdict. She had been forced into marriage with Albin Crane, a man 30 years her senior, in a deal struck with her father when their farm failed and debts came calling. Albin had land, water rights, and a cruel silence that settled over the house like rot. Zadie had been his possession for nearly 4 months now, bride in name, prisoner in truth. She glanced toward the corral where Albin's 2 mules swatted flies with their tails, then beyond it, toward the distant red mesas. The wind shifted, carrying a scent of mesquite and dust. Her fingers tightened around the basket she carried empty like her hope. Inside, Albin drank before noon. He had not laid a hand on her since their wedding night, but his threats were quiet and constant. "You run, girl," he had said once, drunk and staring down at her over a cracked cup, "and I will find you. I always find what's mine." The only thing that kept her going was her memory of freedom. She had been raised wild in the canyon country near Tuba City, where she used to ride bareback through the washes, her hair tangled with wind. That was before the war, before her mother died, before her father sold her future to a man who smelled of leather and smoke and control. That afternoon, while Albin slept inside, reeking of whiskey, she walked farther than usual, pretending to gather firewood. Her feet carried her past the bend in the trail she was never allowed to cross, and that was when she saw him. He was on horseback, a tall Navajo warrior, his skin bronzed by sun, his black hair tied back tight, his eyes sharp as obsidian. He saw her at the same time she saw him. They both froze, Zadie's breath caught, her heart pounded harder than it had in weeks. He dismounted without a word, leading his horse slowly forward, hands open. "You are not safe here," he said. His voice was low and steady, like a drumbeat in the back of her mind. She did not answer. She could not. She just stared at him, at the strength in his shoulders, the calm in his eyes. He looked like he belonged to the earth itself. "I am Raeden Paskel," he said. "I was passing through. I saw the smoke from your chimney. I do not mean harm." Still, she did not speak, but her hands trembled and he saw it. "You do not want to go back there," he said, softer now. "I can see it." Zadie blinked hard. "He will kill me." Raeden's eyes narrowed. "He will not touch you again." She looked back toward the cabin, the roof barely visible through the brush. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please take me away." Raeden did not ask why. He only nodded once. "Come." She threw the basket aside and followed him without looking back. They rode through the night, silent under the stars. Raeden gave her his blanket when the cold crept in. He kept her close to his side, but never too close. She noticed that. He respected her space, but she could feel his presence like a warm shield. By morning they reached a narrow canyon tucked deep in the rocks, hidden from the known trails. A small fire crackled at the center and his horse drank from a shallow stream nearby. "Rest," he said. "You are safe here." Zadie sat near the fire, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. She looked at him. "Why did you help me?" Raeden crouched beside her, adding a stick to the flames. "Because I could see you were not free. And because I know what it means to be held against your will." She stared at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "You were a captive," he nodded, "when I was a boy. I was taken from my clan by soldiers. I escaped 2 years later. I do not let chains stay on anyone if I can break them." She blinked back heat from her eyes. "Thank you." Raeden met her gaze, steady and firm. "You do not owe me thanks. You owe yourself freedom." They stayed hidden for 3 days. Zadie helped him gather wood and wild onions. She washed her face in the clear stream and let the wind dry her hair. She started to laugh again, softly, like remembering how. Raeden watched her, always with quiet respect. When she smiled, he smiled back, hesitant at first, then more certain. On the 4th morning, while they packed up camp, Zadie turned to him. "What will you do now?" "I will take you wherever you want to go." She hesitated. "I do not have anywhere." He stood, his hands on the saddle. "You can stay with my people. My mother's family still lives near Black Mesa." They will welcome you. Zadie stepped closer. And you, he looked down at her, the morning sun warming his face. I will stay too, her breath caught. Why? His voice was quiet. Because I want to. She felt something shift in her chest. She reached for his hand. Raeden did not pull away. They rode together that day, side by side, the wind tugging at their clothes, the red cliffs rising around them like guardians. Zadie had never felt so light and unafraid. By dusk, they reached a small camp nestled beneath the pines. An older woman stepped out of a tent, her face lined with time, her eyes sharp with recognition. Raeden, she said, her hands outstretched. You have come back. He embraced her gently. This is Zadie, he said. She will stay with us. The woman nodded. Then she is welcome. That night, Zadie lay beneath a real roof for the first time in months. Raeden had built a small shelter beside his mother's tent. She could hear the wind through the pine needles and the soft sound of his voice as he spoke with his family. She closed her eyes and breathed deep. She had escaped. She had survived, and somewhere deep in her chest something new had started to grow. Hope. And maybe something more. She sat up and peeked outside. Raeden was sitting alone by the fire, his back to her, watching the flames. She stepped outside and sat beside him. You said you know what chains feel like, she said softly. He nodded. I think I am starting to forget what mine felt like. Raeden turned toward her. Good. She looked at him. His face was shadowed by firelight, but his eyes were clear. I am not afraid anymore, she said. He reached for her hand again, this time with confidence. Their fingers laced together. You never have to be, he said. Zadie leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in a very long time she felt safe. And something inside her whispered, this is just the beginning. The next morning, Zadie woke to the scent of warm cornmeal and cedar. The shelter Raeden had built faced east, and the first light fell across her face like a kindness. She sat up slowly, brushing her fingers through her tangled hair, listening to the quiet rhythm of life beyond the canvas wall. A few voices carried on the breeze, gentle, unhurried, unfamiliar but not unfriendly. She stepped into the day barefoot, the ground cool beneath her toes, and found Raeden crouched by the fire pit with his uncle, a man with deep-set eyes and a weathered braid streaked white. They were stripping bark from willow branches, setting them aside in neat bundles. Raeden looked up when she approached. You slept through the dogs. His voice held something lighter than before, almost teasing. I didn't hear anything, she said, surprised. You were tired. He gestured to a flat stone near the fire. Come. Eat. She sat and accepted a folded piece of fry-bread. As she took her first bite, the older man nodded once in greeting but said nothing more. Raeden offered no explanation for the silence, and Zadie didn't ask. When they finished eating, Raeden rose and handed her a basket. There's wild tobacco near the West Ridge. If you feel strong enough, come with me. Her fingers closed around the handle. I'm ready. They walked together, side by side, through the sloping pine valley. The trail narrowed and curved along a dry wash, scattered with rosemary and blooming globemallow. The quiet between them felt easier now, not empty, but full of shared breath and open sky. Zadie glanced at him. You grew up near here, he shook his head. Farther north, near the San Juan. We came south after the raids. My mother's sister lives here, she nodded. You've been gone a long time, 6 winters, he said. I traveled east. Learned how to track, trade, speak Spanish well enough not to be cheated. She stepped around a patch of kala and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Why did you come back? He didn't answer right away. Then, because I needed to see where I began. And because I had nothing worth staying away for until now. Zadie's steps slowed. You mean me? Raeden stopped walking. Yes. The word hung between them, steady and unflinching. She looked down at the tobacco plants clustered near a boulder. Sometimes I forget how to believe people. I won't ask you to, he said. Not yet. They filled the basket without speaking. Her fingers moved deftly over the leaves, the work grounding her. She remembered helping her mother gather herbs in late summer, the way they'd whisper the names of each plant like prayers. When they'd gathered enough, Raeden straightened and offered her his hand to help her up. She took it without hesitation. Back at camp, Raeden's cousin was shaping clay near the fire, her children chasing one another in the dust. Zadie paused, watching them, a strange ache pressing behind her ribs. Raeden followed her gaze. "You want children?" "I don't know," she said. "I never thought I'd live long enough to ask myself." He didn't press her. Instead, he led her to a shaded spot and showed her how to split the tobacco leaves for drying. They worked until the sun dipped behind the ridge and the air began to cool. That night, after the others had gone inside, Zadie lingered by the fire. Raeden sat beside her, his arms resting on his knees. "I don't know what to do next," she said quietly. "I don't know who I am outside of what's been done to me." "You don't have to know yet," he said. "You just have to live. Each day you choose, that's how it starts." She turned to face him fully. "And what do you choose?" "I choose to stay," he said. "To build something. If you want to build it with me, I'd be honored." Zadie looked into the fire, the flames soft and low. "I don't know if I can love someone again." "I won't ask you to love me," he said. "Only to walk beside me until you know what your heart wants." She didn't answer right away, but her hand found his and they stayed like that, side by side, the stars rising slow above the pines. In the stillness, something settled between them, not certainty, but something close. A beginning. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had the right to choose what came next. The spring rains came late that year, but when they did, they soaked the high desert in steady silence. For 3 days, the clouds held, and the dry earth drank deep. The air smelled of wet stone and pine needles, and the sky never showed its full face. Zadie helped Raeden's aunt grind corn at the shelter's edge, the two of them working in rhythm without many words. The older woman showed her how to shift her weight just so, how to feel the stone's smoothness under her palm. Her movements were sure, careful. Zadie watched her closely, learning not just the technique but the patience behind it. "Your hands are soft," the woman said at last, not unkindly. "They won't stay that way," Zadie answered. The woman nodded. "Good, you'll do better if they don't." That night, when the rain broke for a while, Raeden took Zadie to a place he hadn't shown her before. They walked beyond the main camp, following a narrow path lined with juniper. The moon was hidden, but he moved without hesitation, and she trusted his steps. They reached a clearing where the earth dipped around a shallow basin, filled now with rainwater and ringed by flat stones. Raeden crouched and touched the edge of the water. "This place used to be sacred for the planting season," he said. "My grandfather brought me here when I was small, said if the water held clear for 3 nights, the crops would come strong." Zadie knelt beside him. "You believe that?" "I believe in what people carry from one season to the next," he said. "Belief shapes the hands that work the land." She reached out and skimmed her fingers along the surface. "I don't know what I carry anymore." "You will," he said. "It doesn't have to be named yet." They sat in the stillness, the breeze lifting the edge of her shawl. Raeden didn't speak again, and she didn't need him to. The silence between them had become something else now, not empty, but rooted. The next morning, Zadie helped repair a section of the shelter roof, kneeling beside Raeden's cousin, who handed her woven strips of bark and showed her how to anchor them with wet clay. They worked without pause until the sun crested fully over the trees. Later, as she washed her arms in the stream, she caught her reflection in the water, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, face streaked with dust. She barely recognized the woman staring back, but she didn't look away. That evening, Raeden returned from hunting with a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder. He crouched near the fire as his uncle began to clean them. Zadie joined him, kneeling opposite. She didn't speak at first, but then she looked up and said, "I want to learn to track." Raeden tilted his head. "You certain?" "I want to know what the land says before it's too late to listen," she said. He nodded once. "Then we start tomorrow." They rose before dawn. The ground was still damp and the air sharp with cold. Raeden led her to a ridge where deer often moved before sunrise. He crouched low and pointed to a set of impressions along the mud. "2 does," he said. "1 younger, see how the back print sinks deeper." She's favoring the front. Zadie studied the marks, placing her own hand nearby for scale. How can you tell which way they went? Raeden touched the edge of a print. The soil lifts here. They stepped forward, not back. They followed the trail for an hour, moving quiet as shadows. When the prints disappeared into hard rock, Raeden showed her how to look for the smallest signs: a snapped twig, a shift in moss, a bent blade of grass. She watched the way his eyes moved across the land, never hurried, always listening. "You read the world like a book," she said. He glanced over. "The stories are already written. We just have to know where to look." Zadie didn't speak for a long time after that. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she wanted to carry the quiet with her a little longer. That night, they sat by the fire with Raeden's mother and her sister, the two women weaving together in a rhythm as old as the hills. Zadie listened to the thread pass between their fingers, the way they laughed low and without haste. When the fire burned low and the others drifted inside, Zadie and Raeden remained outside. The stars had returned, scattered and clear. "I think I'm beginning to feel like I belong somewhere," she said. Raeden didn't look away from the sky. "You do?" She turned toward him. "I still wake up sometimes expecting to be back in that cabin." "I wake up expecting to be alone," he said. "Old habits take time to quiet." Zadie reached for his hand. "I don't want to be alone anymore." Raeden looked at her then, really looked. "Then don't be." She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, his arms wrapped around her in quiet certainty. The wind stirred the pine branches above, and the fire cracked softly behind them. For the first time, Zadie didn't feel like she was standing at the edge of something. She felt like she had stepped fully in, and Raeden, he hadn't just offered her freedom. He had given her the space to become someone new, someone whole. The days warmed. Snowmelt trickled down from the high slopes, feeding the streams that braided through the pine foothills. Zadie rose early now, not from fear, but from habit reshaped into choice. She carried water from the spring, swept the shelter floor, helped Raeden's aunt prepare the roots and berries they'd foraged the day before. Her hands no longer hesitated in the work. Her body moved like it knew its place in the world, and for the first time it did. Raeden had taken to hunting farther out, sometimes gone from dawn until dusk. When he returned, he brought more than meat. He brought stories of what he'd seen: elk bedding in the tall grass, mountain lion tracks near the old riverbed, a tree split by lightning so clean it looked carved. He never embellished, he didn't need to. He told the truth straight, and that had become enough. One evening, as he sharpened his skinning knife on a flat stone, Zadie stepped out from the shelter and sat across from him. She watched the blade catch slivers of firelight and said, "You don't talk much about your father." Raeden didn't look up. "There's not much to tell. You ever see him again after you escaped?" "No. Do you want to?" He set the stone aside. "He died before I could choose." She let the question settle before asking, "Was he cruel?" Raeden leaned back, eyes on the fire. "No, just tired." He wouldn't speak when the soldiers came, wouldn't beg, wouldn't fight. He'd already given up. I was old enough to see it and young enough to hate him for it. Zadie traced a line in the dirt beside her. "I didn't hate my father, but I think he hated himself for what he did." Raeden nodded slowly. "Some men carry their shame like a second skin. Others put it on you so they don't have to wear it anymore." She looked at him carefully. "And you?" "I'd rather carry the truth, even when it cuts." They sat without speaking after that. The coals dimmed and the wind carried the scent of juniper through the trees. The next day, Raeden brought her a bow. Not new, but well made. The wood had been sanded smooth, the sinew taut and sure. "I thought I'd watch for a while," he said. "See how you shoot." Zadie raised a brow. "You think I can?" "I think you're stubborn enough to try." They walked to a clearing where the trees opened wide. Raeden set a carved round of wood against a tree and stepped back. She held the bow stiffly at first, but his voice was steady as he guided her stance, adjusted her grip, showed her how to pull with her shoulders, not her arms. The first arrow veered off. The second sank low in the dirt. The third glanced the edge of the target and stuck. She laughed, surprised at herself. Raeden grinned. You don't need to be perfect, just better than what's chasing you, she lowered the bow. Nothing's chasing me anymore, he studied her face. Not outside you, maybe. A silence bloomed between them, not uneasy but deep. That night, Zadie didn't return to her shelter. She remained near the fire long after the others had gone in. Raeden sat across from her, legs folded, hands resting on his knees. I've been thinking, she said, his eyes lifted. I want to stay, not just until I figure things out. I want to put roots down, he nodded once. Then we'll build something here, she hesitated. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. His voice was quiet, firm. You're part of this now, if you want to be. Zadie reached across the space between them and laid her hand over his. I want to be. He turned his palm under hers and held it. No rush, no claim, just the steady warmth of skin against skin. The next morning, they began to gather stone for a new wall one Raeden said would hold through summer storms. Zadie carried each piece herself, stacking them in slow piles near the base of the slope. They worked until sweat soaked their backs and dust clung to their arms. By mid-afternoon, Raeden straightened and looked at her. You still sure? She wiped her brow. I've never been more. He walked to her then, slow and certain. They stood close, shadows touching. He reached up, brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Then this is our place, he said. Zadie leaned into him, her forehead resting against his. It always was. Raeden kissed her with the care of someone who had waited a long time to be gentle. There was no urgency in it, only truth made real. When they stepped back, the sun was sliding low, painting the ridge in gold. Zadie looked out over the land that had taken her in and whispered, I'm free. Raeden didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just took her hand in his and held it as the evening settled around them and the first stars blinked into the sky. By early summer, the valley had turned green in a way Zadie hadn't known the land could manage. The grasses grew tall along the creeks, birds nesting deep in the willows, and the scent of sage warmed in the sun until it filled the air like breath. Zadie and Raeden had finished the wall behind the shelter, stacking the last stone just before the rains eased. Now they were gathering timber from the higher ridge, slow work that required steady hands and patience with the saw. Raeden passed her a strip of dried meat as they rested beneath a cottonwood. You still want to learn to build with me, she chewed thoughtfully. I do, but I want it to be ours, not just something I help with, something we decide together. He nodded, brushing sawdust from his sleeve. I was thinking the same, she smiled, letting her hair fall across her shoulder. Then let's start with the floor. I want it level enough that water won't settle anywhere. Raeden's eyes softened as he looked at her. You want it to last. I want it to hold, she said, even when we're old. They didn't speak again for a while. The quiet came easily now, filled with the sounds of wind through leaves and the dry rasp of their own breath. When they stood, Zadie took his hand without thinking and they started back down the slope. That evening, Raeden's uncle brought out tools wrapped in oilcloth chisels, a hand plane, a brace. My father made these, he said, laying each one out. They were meant for hands that shape homes. I think they've waited long enough. Raeden accepted them with quiet reverence. We'll use them well. Zadie stepped closer. Thank you for trusting us. The older man met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. You've both come far. That's worth building on. The days stretched long and full. They cleared a patch near the edge of the pines, close enough to the creek for water, far enough to catch the first light. Raeden showed her how to square logs with the broad axe, and Zadie learned to notch corners until they fit tight without nails. Her shoulders ached every night, but she didn't mind. Each beam laid was a line written into her life with purpose. One morning, as they raised the frame together, a hawk passed overhead, casting a long shadow across the clearing. Zadie paused mid-swing, watching it cut through the sky. Raeden followed her gaze. My grandfather used to say they only fly low when there's something true below them. She turned to him. Then we must be doing something right. They slept in the half-built cabin once the roof beams were up, curled close on a pallet of cedar boughs. The wind carried the scent of pine resin through the open doorway, and Zadie pressed her forehead to Raeden's chest. "I never thought I'd get to live like this," she whispered. "You're not just living," he said. "You're planting something. And I'll be here to tend it with you." She looked up at him, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw. "I love you," she said, her voice steady. Raeden didn't hesitate. "I've loved you since the first time you didn't look away." In the weeks that followed, they finished the cabin. Raeden carved a lintel beam with a pattern his grandfather had taught him: mountain ridges and water lines, symbols of protection and endurance. Zadie wove willow branches into baskets and hung them from the rafters, filling them with wild herbs and seed corn. One morning, as she folded a blanket near the hearth, she felt a sudden wave of warmth rise through her body, dizzying and sharp. She sat down, pressing a hand to her belly. A knowing settled into her, quiet and certain. That evening, as they sat by the fire, she took Raeden's hand and placed it gently against her stomach. "I think we'll need a second bedroll soon," she said. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and then slowly, he smiled, not with surprise, but with a deep, quiet joy that reached every corner of his face. He didn't speak. He just pulled her close and held her there, his hand resting over the new life they'd created. By mid-autumn, word came from a nearby settlement of a traveling priest passing through. Raeden's uncle rode out and returned with him 3 days later. They married beneath the cottonwoods at the edge of the clearing. Zadie wore a necklace made of shell and turquoise, passed down from Raeden's mother. Raeden offered her a woven sash, dyed with walnut and cochineal, and tied it around her waist himself. They spoke their vows in quiet voices, not for the crowd but for each other. And when it was done, they stood hand in hand while the fire crackled and the stars rose overhead. That winter, the child came early on a night when the snow fell soft and steady. Raeden never left her side. When their son cried out for the first time, Zadie wept not from pain but from something deeper. She held the child against her chest, his skin warm and damp, and looked up at Raeden. "He's strong," she whispered. Raeden knelt beside her, sweeping the hair from her brow. "He's yours." "Of course he is." They named him Toe for the water that had kept them alive and brought them together. Years passed. The cabin grew fuller, not just with things, but with life. The floor never warped. The walls held through every storm. Zadie taught their son how to listen to trees before he cut them, how to thank the earth before he planted. Raeden taught him the quiet art of tracking and how to speak with honesty, even when it was hard. They grew older together, but never apart. Their love settled in like a deep root, unshaken, unseen to the world, but strong enough to hold through every season. And each morning, as the sun crested over the ridge, Zadie would rise, look out across the land they'd shaped, and know without doubt, without fear, that she had chosen well. She had found not just freedom, but a home. And in Raeden, a heart that had never once let hers go.